Welcome to Wonderful Stories, a place where imagination comes alive. So let's begin.
Part 1. The Review That Burned Him Alive. Dean Laurent did not read reviews. Reviews were for insecure chefs.
Weak chef.
Chefs who needed validation from people who had never held a knife long enough to bleed for their craft. Dean Laurent was not weak. He was a legend. At only 29, he owned Inferno, the most exclusive restaurant in the city. Reservations were booked 6 months in advance. Food critics called him a genius. Television shows called him the devil in the kitchen. His staff called him terrifying. And he preferred it that way. Fear kept things perfect. Tonight, Inferno was flawless. The kitchen roared with life. Flames rising, pans clashing, orders being shouted. Dean stood at the center, tall and imposing in his pristine white chef's coat. Sleeves rolled to his elbows. His dark hair was pushed back messily, his sharp eyes scanning every plate like a predator searching for weakness. Table 12. Move, he said coldly. Yes, chef. Plate was placed before him. Dean stared at it. 3 seconds. 4. 5. He grabbed it and threw it into the trash. The entire kitchen froze. It's overcooked, he said quietly. No one breathed. Do it again. Yes, chef. Perfection or nothing. That was his rule. That was his life. And he was untouchable. Or so he thought. It happened at 2:13 a.m. Dean sat alone in his penthouse, city lights glowing outside his floor-to-ceiling windows. He had just finished a glass of expensive whiskey when his phone buzzed. A message from his manager. You need to see this. A link. Dean frowned. He almost ignored it. Almost. He tapped it. The page loaded. A food blog. He nearly scoffed until he saw the title. Inferno, all fire, no soul. Dean's jaw tightened. He read. Dean Laurent is undeniably skilled. Technically flawless. Precise. Controlled. Empty. Dean's grip tightened around his phone. He kept reading. Every dish was beautiful. Every bite was perfect. And none of it meant anything. His chest burned. It tasted like someone who had forgotten why they started cooking. Like someone who only cared about being the best, not about making people feel. Dean stopped breathing. Dean Laurent cooks to impress, not to love. And you can taste the difference. The silence in his penthouse became suffocating. His hands trembled. Not from hurt, from rage. At the bottom of the page was the blogger's name. Parker. No last name. No photo. Just Parker. Dean laughed. It was not a sane sound. Who the hell do you think you are? He whispered. No one spoke to him like that. No one. He grabbed his phone and dialed. His manager answered instantly. Dean. I want his name. Silence. Dean. It's just some nobody blogger. I want his name. His voice was quiet. Dangerously quiet. Okay. 2 days later, Dean stood in front of the smallest bakery he had ever seen. It was pathetic. A tiny shop tucked between a laundromat and a flower store. The sign above the door read, Sweet Haven. Dean stared at it in disbelief. This is him, he muttered. This was the person who dared to criticize him. He pushed the door open. A bell chimed softly. Warm air wrapped around him. It smelled like sugar, vanilla, butter. Home. Dean frowned. It was pleasant. The bakery was cozy. Small wooden tables. Sunlight streaming through the windows. And behind the counter, Dean froze. The man standing there was not what he expected. He was beautiful. Soft brown hair fell over gentle eyes. His figure was slender, wrapped in a simple cream sweater and apron dusted with flour. He looked up. Their eyes met, and he smiled. It was small, shy. Welcome, he said softly. What can I get you? Dean stared. This was Parker? This gentle, fragile-looking man? You, Dean said. The smile faltered. Me. You're Parker. Parker froze. Dean saw the exact moment he realized. His face went pale. I don't know what you mean. Dean threw his phone on the counter. The review glowed on the screen. Parker stared at it. His hands began to shake. Dean leaned closer. You wrote this. It was not a question. Parker swallowed. Yes. The admission was barely a whisper. Dean's anger exploded. You think you can judge me? Parker flinched. Dean felt a twisted satisfaction. You run a toy bakery and you think you understand my food? You have no right. Parker's fingers tightened around the counter. I didn't mean to hurt you. Dean laughed coldly. You failed. Silence. Parker looked down. I was honest. Dean's jaw clenched. Honest. 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 The word echoed in his head like an insult. Dean should have left. He should have walked away. But something stopped him. Something in Parker's face. Sadness. Not arrogance. Not cruelty. Pain. Dean narrowed his eyes. Why? Parker blinked. Why? Why write it? Parker hesitated. For a moment, Dean thought he wouldn't answer. Then Parker whispered, because I know what it feels like to cook without love. Dean froze. Parker's voice trembled. It hurts. Dean's anger faltered. Just slightly. Parker quickly wiped his eyes. I'm sorry, he said. You can hate me if you want. Dean stared at him. This man was not what he expected. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't arrogant. He was broken. Dean should have left. He didn't. Instead, he said something insane. You'll make it up to me. Parker looked confused. What? Dean's eyes were cold. I'm working here. Silence. What? For 1 month. Parker stared at him like he'd lost his mind. You insulted my cooking, Dean said. So prove you're better. I never said I was better. Then you have nothing to fear. Parker shook his head. This is ridiculous. Dean leaned closer. Are you refusing? Parker hesitated. Dean saw it. The guilt. The hesitation. The weakness. 1 month, Parker whispered. Dean smiled. It was not kind. Good. He had no idea. This tiny bakery would change his life. And Parker had no idea. He had just invited the devil into his kitchen. Part 2. The devil in the tiny kitchen. Dean Laurent did not belong here. Everything about Sweet Haven offended him. The kitchen was too small, too warm, too quiet. He stood in the doorway, arms crossed, his pristine black chef's coat looking absurdly expensive against the bakery's soft pastel walls. Parker stood at the counter kneading dough. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing slim wrists dusted in flour. His soft brown hair fell into his eyes as he worked, his expression calm and focused. Dean hated how peaceful he looked. You're late, Parker said gently. Dean's eye twitched. I'm early. You're 30 minutes late. Dean glared. Parker didn't look up. Dean felt something unfamiliar. He was being dismissed. In his restaurant, people trembled when he entered the room. Here, Parker handed him an apron. It was light blue. Dean stared at it like it was diseased. I'm not wearing that. You can't work without it. I don't work in bakeries. Parker looked at him. Really looked at him. His voice stayed soft. Then why are you here? Dean opened his mouth. Closed it. His pride answered for him. Fine. He grabbed the apron. It was cheap cotton. He hated it. He put it on anyway. Parker smiled. Dean hated that more. Wash your hands, Parker said. Dean scoffed. I know basic hygiene. Wash them anyway. Dean stared at him. Parker didn't back down. Dean felt something twist in his chest. No one told him what to do. No one. And yet, he walked to the sink. Washed his hands. When he turned around, Parker was watching him. Not with fear. Not with admiration. Just watching. Dean didn't like it. Now what? Parker hesitated. You can help me shape the dough. Dean laughed. You want me to shape dough? Yes. Dean stepped closer. The dough sat on the counter soft and pale. Fragile. Dean poked it. It sank under his finger. This is it. Parker nodded. Dean grabbed it. Too hard. The dough tore. Parker gasped. Stop. Dean froze. Parker rushed forward. You're hurting it. Dean stared at him. Hurting it. It needs to be gentle. Dean almost laughed. It was dough. Not a living thing. Watch, Parker said. He placed his hands on the dough. His movements were slow, careful, loving. He folded it gently, his fingers guiding instead of forcing. Dean watched. Something in his chest tightened. "Try again," Parker said. Dean hesitated. Then, he touched the dough. Softer this time. Still felt wrong. He was used to control, force, precision. This required something else. Something he didn't understand. Patience. The dough responded. It didn't tear. Dean frowned. "Why does it feel different?" Parker smiled. "Because you stopped fighting it." Dean didn't answer. Hours passed. Dean worked. And failed. He burned a tray of croissants. Overmixed batter. Dropped a bowl. He was terrible. Dean Laurent, the greatest chef in the city, was terrible. His frustration burned. "This is stupid." Parker calmly removed the ruined tray. "It's okay." "It's not okay." Dean's voice was sharp. "I don't fail." Parker looked at him. "Everyone fails." Dean laughed bitterly. "No." Parker hesitated, then quietly said, "You did when you forgot how to cook with love." Silence. Dean's hands clenched. The words hit too close. He turned away. "I don't need this." He walked toward the door. "Dean." He stopped. Parker's voice was soft. "Why did you really come?" Dean didn't answer. He didn't know. He left. That night, Dean couldn't sleep. His penthouse felt cold. Empty. His hands still remembered the feeling of the dough. Soft. Alive. He clenched his fists. He thought of Parker's words. "You forgot how to cook with love." Dean grabbed his keys. He didn't think. He just drove. Sweet Haven was dark. Closed. Dean stood outside. He told himself to leave. He didn't. The back door opened. Parker stepped out. He froze when he saw Dean. "Chef." Dean ignored the title. "What are you doing?" Parker looked embarrassed. "Baking." "At midnight." Parker nodded. "I like the quiet." Dean hesitated. "Why?" Parker looked down. "It hurts less." Dean didn't understand. But he wanted to. "Show me." Parker blinked. "What?" "Show me how you bake." Parker stared at him. Then slowly, he smiled. And for the first time, Dean Laurent felt something dangerous begin. Not anger. Not pride. Something softer. Something warmer. Something he could not control. Part 3. The things he couldn't fix. Dean Laurent did not understand Parker. He understood heat, pressure, pain. He understood how to break people down and rebuild them into perfection. But Parker was already broken. And Dean didn't know what to do with broken things. It became routine. Dean would arrive at Sweet Haven in the morning, his expensive car looking out of place on the quiet suburban street. He would step inside, tie the stupid blue apron around his waist, and work, and fail, again, and again, and again. "Not like that," Parker said softly behind him. Dean gritted his teeth. "I know. You're squeezing too hard." Dean stopped. He looked down at the dough in his hands. It was ruined. Again. His jaw tightened. "I hate this." Parker stepped closer. "You hate not being good at it." Dean turned sharply. "I'm good at everything." The words came out harsher than he intended. Parker flinched. The movement was small, but Dean saw it, and something ugly twisted in his chest. Parker looked down. "You don't have to prove anything here." Dean laughed bitterly. "You're the one who said my food was empty." Silence filled the kitchen. Parker didn't deny it, didn't apologize. "It was," Parker said quietly. Dean's vision went red. "You think you're better than me?" "No." "Then why say it?" Parker's hands trembled slightly. Dean noticed. "Because I know what empty tastes like." Dean froze. Parker's voice was fragile, like glass seconds from shattering. "I lived on empty food for years," Parker continued. "Food made by someone who didn't care." Dean's anger flickered. Confusion replaced it. "What does that mean?" Parker hesitated. Dean saw the war inside him. The hesitation. The fear. And then, "My ex," Parker whispered. Dean's chest tightened. "He was a chef too." The words fell heavy between them. He was talented. Everyone loved him. Everyone admired him. Parker laughed weakly. I did too. Dean didn't move. He said he loved me, Parker continued. He said I was his inspiration. Parker's fingers clenched. But he only loved what I could give him. Dean's stomach twisted. He stopped caring, Parker said. About me. About us. His voice cracked. And I stayed. Dean's chest felt strange. Tight. Uncomfortable. He would cook, Parker said. Beautiful food. Perfect food. A tear slid down his cheek. But it tasted empty. Silence filled the room. And one day, Parker whispered. He left. Dean's hands clenched. Why? Parker smiled. It was broken. He said I wasn't useful anymore. Dean stopped breathing. Parker quickly wiped his tears.
I'm sorry.
I shouldn't have said that. Dean didn't know why, but he felt angry. Not at Parker. Someone else. Someone he had never met. That's why I wrote your review, Parker said softly. Because I recognized it. Dean stared at him. You cooked like him. The words hit harder than any insult. Dean stepped back. His chest burned. I'm not him. I know. Then don't compare me to him. Parker looked down. Then prove it. Dean's control snapped. I don't need to prove anything to you. The words echoed violently. Parker flinched again. Dean saw it, and hated himself for it. I built everything I have with my own hands, Dean said, his voice shaking with anger. I didn't need anyone. Parker whispered. That sounds lonely. Dean froze. Lonely. He opened his mouth. No words came out, because it was true. He turned away. I'm leaving. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't stay. He grabbed his coat and walked out. Parker stood alone in the kitchen. The silence was suffocating. He stared at the ruined dough on the counter. He touched it gently. I'm sorry, he whispered. He didn't know if he meant Dean or himself. Dean drove. Fast. Too fast. His hands gripped the steering wheel. His mind replayed Parker's words over and over. That sounds lonely. He slammed his hand against the wheel. I'm not lonely. He had everything. Success, money, power, respect. He had everything. So why did his chest hurt? That night, Dean stood in his empty penthouse. The city sparkled outside his windows. Beautiful, cold. He walked into his kitchen. It was spotless, perfect, lifeless. He stared at it. Then, he started cooking. Not for customers. Not for critics. For himself. His movements were automatic. Precise. Controlled. He plated the dish. Perfect. He took a bite. He froze. Tasted. Empty. Dean dropped the fork. His hands trembled. Parker was right. The realization hit him like a punch. He hated it. He hated him. He hated himself. The next morning, Dean returned. He didn't know why, but he did. He stepped inside Sweet Haven. Parker stood behind the counter. His eyes widened. You came back. Dean looked away. I said I would stay for a month. Parker smiled. Small. Relieved. Good. Dean's chest tightened. Parker handed him the blue apron. Dean took it. This time, he didn't complain. They worked in silence. Until Parker stepped behind him. Your hands, Parker said softly. Dean stilled. Parker gently took his wrists. Dean's breath caught. Parker's hands were warm. Soft. Relax, Parker whispered. Dean's heart pounded. Parker guided his movements. Slow. Gentle. Dean followed. The dough didn't tear. It didn't break. It responded. Dean stared at their hands. At the way Parker held him. Trusted him. Didn't fear him. Something inside Dean cracked. Just slightly. And for the first time, Dean Laurent wondered if maybe he didn't want to be untouchable anymore. Part 4. The man who broke him first. Dean Laurent was losing control. He realized it in the smallest moments. In the way he arrived earlier than necessary, just to see Parker open the bakery. In the way his eyes followed Parker without permission. In the way, the quiet kitchen didn't feel suffocating anymore. As long as Parker was in it. Dean hated it, and he didn't understand it. It was a slow afternoon. Sunlight streamed through the windows, painting Parker in gold as he arranged fresh pastries in the display case. Dean leaned against the counter, pretending not to watch him. Parker hummed softly. It was distracting. Annoyingly distracting. "Why do you do that?" Dean asked. Parker looked up. "Do what?" "That." Dean gestured vaguely. "The humming." Parker blinked, then smiled. "It makes me happy." Dean didn't know how to respond to that. Happy. Such a simple word. Such a foreign feeling. Before he could reply, the door opened, the bell chimed, and everything changed. "Parker." The voice was male. "Familiar." Parker froze. Dean saw the exact moment Parker's body went rigid. Slowly, Parker turned around. His face went pale. "Evan." Dean's chest tightened. A tall man stood in the doorway. Confident, well-dressed, handsome. He smiled like he belonged there, like he had every right. Dean hated him instantly. "I finally found you," Evan said softly. Parker's hands trembled. "Why are you here?" Evan stepped closer. "I wanted to see you." Dean pushed himself off the counter. His instincts screamed danger. Parker stepped back. "You shouldn't be here." Evan's smile faltered. "I just want to talk." "There's nothing to talk about." Dean watched Parker carefully. He had never seen Parker like this. Afraid. Evan noticed Dean. His eyes narrowed slightly. "Who's this?" Parker hesitated. Dean answered for him. "Dean." Evan looked him up and down. Judging. Measuring. Dismissing. "I'm Evan," he said. Dean didn't offer his hand. "I know." Evan blinked. "You do. You're the chef who left him." Silence fell like a blade. Parker's eyes widened. Evan stiffened. Dean didn't look away. Evan laughed awkwardly. "I see." Parker whispered. "Dean, don't." But Dean couldn't stop. "You broke him." Evan's expression hardened. "That's none of your business." "It became my business when you made him cry." Parker grabbed Dean's sleeve. "Stop." His voice was fragile. Dean looked down at him, saw the fear, and stopped. For him. Only for him. Evan noticed, and his expression darkened. "So this is why you disappeared," Evan said. Parker froze. "You replaced me." Parker shook his head. "No." But he sounded unsure. Evan stepped closer. "You look thinner," Evan said softly. Dean's hands clenched. "I missed you." Parker's eyes filled with tears. Dean saw it, and something inside him snapped. "Don't." Evan looked at him. Dean's voice was cold. "Don't say things you don't mean." Evan smirked. "And who are you to tell me that?" Dean stepped forward. "I'm the one who stayed." Silence. Heavy. Dangerous. Evan's jaw tightened. "You think you know him?" Dean didn't hesitate. "I know enough." Evan laughed bitterly. "You don't know how he cries at night." Dean's heart stopped. "You don't know how he begs to be loved." Dean stopped breathing. "You don't know how weak he is." Dean moved before he could think. He grabbed Evan's collar. "Don't." His voice was lethal. Evan froze. Dean's eyes burned. "You don't get to call him weak." Parker gasped. "Dean." Dean didn't let go. "He survived you." Silence. "He's stronger than you'll ever be." Evan's expression twisted. Dean released him. Evan stepped back. He looked at Parker. "You've changed." Parker whispered. "No, I haven't." Evan studied him, then sighed. "I'm sorry." The words hung in the air. Parker trembled. Dean didn't believe him. Evan turned to leave. He paused at the door. "I hope he doesn't break you too." Then he left. The bell chimed, and he was gone. The bakery was silent. Parker stood frozen. Dean watched him. "Parker." Parker covered his face. His shoulders shook. Dean panicked. He didn't know what to do. He had never been good with tears. But Parker was crying. And Dean couldn't breathe. He stepped closer. Slowly. Carefully. Like approaching something fragile. "Hey!" Parker didn't look up. Dean hesitated. Then, he placed his hand on Parker's shoulder. Parker flinched. Dean froze, but Parker didn't pull away. Dean's hand tightened slightly. "I'm here." The words slipped out. Soft, unfamiliar, honest. Parker looked up. His eyes were red, vulnerable. "Why?" Dean didn't understand the question. "Why what? Why do you care?" Dean opened his mouth. No answer came, because he didn't know. He just did. Parker laughed weakly. "You barely know me," Dean whispered. "I know enough." Parker stared at him. Dean's heart pounded. "I know you hum when you're happy." Parker's breath caught. "I know you work when you're sad." Parker's lips parted. "I know you pretend you're okay when you're not." Silence. Dean stepped closer. "You're not weak." Parker's eyes filled again. Dean's voice dropped. "You're the strongest person I've ever met." Parker broke. He stepped forward. And before Dean could react, Parker buried his face in Dean's chest. Dean froze. His heart stopped. Parker was shaking. Dean hesitated. Then, slowly, he wrapped his arms around him. Parker was warm, soft, real. Dean held him tighter. Something inside him shifted. Something dangerous. Something irreversible. Dean Laurent realized. He wanted to protect him. Not because of pride. Not because of ego. But because Parker mattered. More than he should. More than Dean was ready to admit. Dean closed his eyes. And held him. Part 5. The night he couldn't let go. Parker fell asleep in Dean's arms. Dean realized it slowly. At first, Parker was just trembling against him. His fingers clutching weakly at the front of Dean's shirt. His breathing uneven and fragile. Then, he grew still. His weight softened. His breathing deepened. Dean looked down. Parker's face rested against his chest. His eyes closed. His lashes still damp with tears. He looked younger like this. Smaller. Trusting. Dean's arms tightened around him instinctively. He didn't move. Didn't breathe. Because he didn't want to wake him. The bakery was quiet. The late afternoon sun had faded into evening. Shadows stretching across the wooden floor. Dean didn't know how long he stood there. Minutes. Maybe longer. But eventually, Parker stirred. His body shifted slightly, and he murmured something unintelligible. His fingers curling weakly into Dean's shirt. Dean's heart pounded. "Parker," he said quietly. No response. He was still asleep. Dean swallowed. He should wake him. He should step away. He should let go. He didn't. Instead, he carefully slid one arm under Parker's knees and lifted him. Parker was light. Too light. Dean felt something twist painfully in his chest. Parker stirred slightly, his head falling against Dean's shoulder. "Dean!" Dean froze. It was the first time Parker had said his name like that. Soft, needy, unconscious. Dean's grip tightened. "I've got you," he whispered. He didn't know why he said it, but he meant it. He carried him toward the back room, the small resting area Parker used during long nights. It was simple. A narrow couch, a folded blanket, pillow. Dean gently lowered Parker onto it. Parker shifted, his hand grabbing Dean's sleeve weakly. Dean stilled. "Don't go," Parker whispered. Dean's breath caught. He stared down at him. Parker's eyes were still closed. He wasn't awake. He didn't know what he was saying. But Dean knew what he felt, and it terrified him. "I'm not," Dean said quietly. Parker relaxed. His fingers loosened, but didn't let go completely. Dean sat beside him. He didn't know why. He just couldn't leave. He watched Parker sleep. Watched the slow rise and fall of his chest. Watched the softness of his expression. This was the man who had broken his pride. The man who had seen through him. The man who made him feel things he didn't understand. Dean reached out before he could stop himself. His fingers brushed Parker's hair. Soft, warm, real. Parker stirred. His eyes fluttered open slightly. "Dean." Dean pulled his hand back. "You're awake." Parker blinked slowly, confused. "What happened?" "You fell asleep." Parker's cheeks flushed faintly.
I'm sorry.
Dean frowned. Why are you apologizing? I shouldn't have. Parker hesitated. Leaned on you. Dean's chest tightened. You can. Parker looked at him, surprised. Dean's voice was quiet. You can lean on me. Silence filled the small room. Parker's lips parted. Dean's heart pounded. He didn't understand what he was doing. Didn't understand why he wanted to stay. Why he wanted Parker to look at him like that. Like he mattered. Parker whispered, "Why?" Dean didn't answer immediately. Because he didn't know how. Because the truth was too big. Too dangerous. Too real. Instead, he said, "Because you do the same." Parker stared at him. And Dean realized. He would. Parker smiled faintly. I would. Their eyes held. The air between them shifted. Something fragile. Something new. Something neither of them could name. Dean's gaze dropped to Parker's lips. Soft. Slightly parted. Dean's breath slowed. His body leaned forward before his mind could stop him. Parker didn't move. Didn't pull away. His eyes widened slightly. Dean stopped. Just inches away. He could feel Parker's breath. Warm. Unsteady. Dean's heart pounded violently. What was he doing? This wasn't him. He didn't do this. He didn't need anyone. He didn't want anyone. But Parker made him want. Dean whispered, I should go. Parker's expression fell. The loss in his eyes was immediate. It hurt more than Dean expected. Dean stood abruptly. He couldn't stay. If he stayed, he would do something he couldn't take back. Something that would change everything. Parker sat up slowly. Dean. Dean paused at the door. He didn't turn around. Because he was afraid. Afraid of what he'd see. Afraid of what he'd feel. Thank you, Parker said softly. Dean closed his eyes. His chest ached. He nodded once. Then he left. That night, Dean didn't sleep. He sat on his bed, staring into the darkness. His mind replayed everything. Parker's voice. Parker's touch. Parker's face. He ran a hand through his hair. This is stupid, he muttered. He had worked his entire life to become untouchable, unbreakable, unstoppable. And now, one soft-spoken baker was destroying all of it. Dean laughed bitterly. What are you doing to me? He didn't know the answer, but he knew one thing. He couldn't walk away, because when Parker had held onto him, Dean hadn't wanted to let go either. The next morning, Dean arrived earlier than ever. He stood outside Sweet Haven, watching, waiting. The lights turned on. Parker appeared inside. Dean's chest tightened. Parker looked tired. But when he saw Dean through the window, he smiled. And Dean realized that smile mattered more to him than anything else. More than his pride. More than his reputation. More than his fear. Dean walked inside. Parker greeted him softly. Good morning. Dean looked at him. Really looked at him. And for the first time, Dean Laurent knew. He was falling in love. And he had no idea how to stop. Part 6. The jealousy he couldn't hide. Dean Laurent did not get jealous. Jealousy was a useless emotion. It made people irrational, weak, out of control. Dean was never out of control. Until Parker. It was a busy morning at Sweet Haven. Busier than usual. Dean stood behind the counter, arms crossed, watching Parker move between customers with his usual soft smile. Thank you for waiting, Parker said gently as he handed over a box of pastries. The customer, a young man, probably around Parker's age, didn't take the box immediately. He was staring at Parker, smiling. You always make the best croissants, the man said. Parker smiled politely. I'm glad you like them. Dean didn't like the way he was looking at him. Not at all. You must work really hard, the man continued. Parker shrugged shyly. I just do what I love. Dean's jaw tightened. The man leaned on the counter. You know, there's a cafe opening nearby. They're looking for talented bakers. Parker blinked. Oh, yeah, the man said. You'd be perfect there. Dean's hands clenched. Perfect. The man smiled wider. They'd probably pay you a lot more than this tiny place. Parker laughed softly. I'm happy here. Dean's chest loosened slightly. But then, you should still consider it, the man said. You deserve better. Dean moved before he could stop himself. He's not interested. The words came out cold, sharp, possessive. Both Parker and the man looked at him. The man frowned. I wasn't talking to you. Dean stepped closer. His presence filled the space. You heard his answer. The man's eyes narrowed. And who are you? Dean didn't hesitate. Someone who knows him. Silence. Heavy. Uncomfortable. The man scoffed. Right? He took the box. But before leaving, he looked at Parker. My offer still stands. Then he walked out. The bell chimed. The door closed. And the bakery fell silent. Parker looked at Dean. Dean. Dean avoided his gaze. He was angry. He didn't know why. Actually, he did know why. He just didn't want to admit it. You didn't have to do that, Parker said softly. Dean's head snapped toward him. Yes, I did. Parker blinked. Why? Dean opened his mouth. Paused. Because he didn't have an answer Parker was ready to hear. He was bothering you. Parker shook his head gently. He wasn't. Dean stepped closer. His voice dropped. He was trying to take you away. The words slipped out before he could stop them. Parker froze. Dean froze too. Because now it was out. Raw. Honest. Dangerous. Parker's voice was barely a whisper. Why does that matter? Dean's heart pounded. Because you matter. Because I can't lose you. Because you're mine. Dean stopped himself. Mean it? Since when did Parker belong to him? He didn't. Dean looked away. It doesn't. Parker's expression fell. The disappointment in his eyes hit harder than anything. Dean immediately regretted it. He hated that look. Hated being the cause of it. Parker turned away. I'll go check the oven. Dean stood there, alone, frustrated, angry, at himself. The rest of the day was quiet. Too quiet. Parker barely spoke. Dean barely breathed. The distance between them felt suffocating. Dean couldn't take it anymore. Parker paused, but didn't turn around. Yes. Dean struggled. Words had never been this difficult before. I didn't mean. He stopped. He didn't know how to finish. Parker turned slowly. His eyes were careful, guarded. Dean hated that. He stepped closer. His voice softened. Don't want you to leave. Silence. Parker's breath caught. Dean's chest tightened. He stepped even closer. Close enough to see every tiny emotion on Parker's face. You belong here, Dean said quietly. Parker's lips parted. Dean's voice dropped further. With me. The words hung between them. Parker's cheeks flushed. Dean's heart pounded violently. He had never said anything like that before. Never felt anything like this before. Parker whispered, Dean. Dean reached out. His fingers brushed Parker's wrist. Warm. Soft. Parker didn't pull away. Dean's hand slid down. Their fingers intertwined. Parker gasped softly. Dean's control shattered. He pulled Parker closer. Not forcefully, but firmly, like he was afraid he'd disappear. Parker's free hand rested against Dean's chest. Dean could feel his heartbeat. Fast. Matching his own. Their faces were inches apart. Dean's gaze dropped to Parker's lips. Parker's breath trembled. Neither of them moved. Neither of them spoke. The world disappeared. There was only this moment. Only this feeling. Only him. Dean leaned in. Slowly. Carefully. Parker's eyes fluttered closed. Dean's heart stopped. Just a little closer. The bell chimed loudly. They both froze. Parker pulled back instantly. Dean stepped away. The moment shattered. A customer walked in. Oblivious. Dean felt like he'd been punched. Parker avoided his gaze. I'll help them, Parker said quickly. He walked away. Dean stood there, his chest aching, his hands empty. He stared at Parker's back and realized he had crossed a line. There was no going back now. Because Dean Laurent didn't just want Parker. He needed him, and that terrified him more than anything else. Part 7. The kiss that changed everything. Everything was different after that almost kiss. Dean felt it in the silence. In the way Parker avoided his eyes. In the way Parker's fingers trembled when they accidentally brushed. In the way neither of them spoke about it. But it was there. Lingering. Waiting. Dean hated waiting. 3 days passed. 3 long, suffocating days. Dean barely slept. Barely ate. Barely functioned. Because every time he closed his eyes, he saw Parker. The way his lips had parted. The way he had leaned in. The way he hadn't pulled away. Dean knew what it meant. Parker wanted him too. So why was he running? That night, rain poured outside. Heavy. Relentless. Sweet Haven was closed. But the lights were still on. Dean stood across the street, staring at the window. He could see Parker inside. Alone. Dean's chest tightened. He crossed the street before he could stop himself. He opened the door. The bell chimed. Parker looked up. His eyes widened. Dean. Dean stepped inside. Locked the door behind him. Parker's hands tightened around the towel he was holding. "You're closed," Parker said softly. "I know." Silence. Rain hit the windows. Loud. Chaotic. Matching Dean's heart. Parker swallowed. "Why are you here?" Dean stepped closer. Parker stepped back. Not far. But enough. Dean noticed. And it hurt. "Stop avoiding me," Dean said. Parker froze. "I'm not." "You are." Parker looked down. Dean's voice softened. "Why?" Parker whispered. "Because I'm scared." Dean's chest tightened. "Of me?" Parker shook his head. "Of this." "This." Dean stepped closer. Parker didn't move this time. His voice trembled. "I don't want to get hurt again." The words shattered something inside Dean. He understood. More than Parker realized. Dean reached out slowly. His fingers tilted Parker's chin up gently. "Look at me." Parker hesitated. Then did. His eyes were vulnerable. Open. Terrified. Dean spoke quietly. "I would never leave you." Parker's breath caught. Dean's thumb brushed his cheek. Soft. Careful. Like he was touching something precious. "I'm not him." Parker's eyes filled with emotion. "I know," he whispered. Dean leaned closer. Slow. Giving Parker time to stop him. Parker didn't stop him. Dean's heart pounded violently. He could feel Parker's breath. Warm. Unsteady. Dean whispered, "Tell me to stop." Parker didn't speak. Didn't move. His eyes fluttered closed. Dean broke. He closed the distance. Their lips met. Soft.
Tentative.
Warm. Dean froze. His entire world stopped. Parker's lips were gentle. Fragile. Real. Dean's hand slid to the back of Parker's neck. Holding him. Not forcing. Just there. Parker leaned into him. And Dean lost himself. Dean noticed. And it hurt. "Stop avoiding me," Dean said. Parker froze. "I'm not." "You are." Parker looked down. Dean's voice softened. "Why?" Parker whispered. "Because I'm scared." Dean's chest tightened. "Of me?" Parker shook his head. "Of this." "This." Dean stepped closer. Parker didn't move this time. His voice trembled. "I don't want to get hurt again." The words shattered something inside Dean. He understood. More than Parker realized. Dean reached out slowly. His fingers tilted Parker's chin up gently. "Look at me." Parker hesitated. Then did. His eyes were vulnerable. Open. Terrified. Dean spoke quietly. "I would never leave you." Parker's breath caught. Dean's thumb brushed his cheek. Soft. Careful. Like he was touching something precious. "I'm not him." Parker's eyes filled with emotion. "I know," he whispered. Dean leaned closer. Slow. Giving Parker time to stop him. Parker didn't stop him. Dean's heart pounded violently. He could feel Parker's breath. Warm. Unsteady. Dean whispered, "Tell me to stop." Parker didn't speak. Didn't move. His eyes fluttered closed. Dean broke. He closed the distance. Their lips met. Soft.
Tentative.
Warm. Dean froze. His entire world stopped. Parker's lips were gentle, fragile, real. Dean's hand slid to the back of Parker's neck, holding him, not forcing, just there. Parker leaned into him, and Dean lost himself. This time, he kissed Dean first. Dean's heart exploded. His arms wrapped around Parker instantly, holding him, protecting him, keeping him, because Parker wasn't just someone he wanted anymore. He was someone Dean couldn't live without. The rain continued outside, but inside, Dean had finally found warmth, and he never wanted to let it go. Part 8. The choice that could destroy them. Dean didn't remember falling asleep. He only remembered Parker, Parker's lips, Parker's hands, Parker's warmth. And for the first time in his life, Dean Laurent slept peacefully. Morning came quietly. Soft sunlight slipped through the curtains of the small back room. Dean opened his eyes slowly. He didn't recognize where he was at first. This wasn't his penthouse. It wasn't cold. It wasn't empty. It was warm. And then, he felt it. A weight against his chest. Dean looked down. Parker was asleep on him. His head rested just below Dean's shoulder. His arm loosely wrapped around Dean's waist. Dean froze. His heart began to pound. Not in panic. Not in fear. In something else. Something gentle. Something terrifyingly precious. Parker shifted slightly in his sleep. His fingers tightened unconsciously against Dean's shirt. Dean exhaled slowly. He didn't want to move. Didn't want to break this moment. He carefully lifted his hand. Brushed Parker's hair back. Soft. Parker stirred. His eyes fluttered open. For a moment he looked confused. Then he remembered. His cheeks turned pink. "Morning," Parker whispered. Dean stared at him. Morning. No one had ever looked at him like this in the morning. Soft. Safe. Happy. Dean spoke quietly. Morning. They stayed like that. Neither moving. Neither wanting to. Parker smiled shyly. "You didn't leave." Dean frowned slightly. "Why would I?" Parker hesitated. "People usually do." Dean's chest tightened painfully. He pulled Parker closer. "I'm not people." Parker's breath caught. Dean pressed his forehead gently against Parker's. "I'm not going anywhere." Parker closed his eyes. Relief washed over his face. Dean realized. He meant it. The bakery opened late that morning. Neither of them mentioned it. They worked together. Side by side. Close. Too close. Every small touch sent electricity through Dean's body. Their hands brushed. Parker smiled. Dean forgot how to breathe. This was dangerous. Because Dean was happy. Truly happy. For the first time in years. Maybe ever. And happiness meant something to lose. The bell above the door rang. Dean barely glanced up. Until...
Chef Laurent.
Dean froze. His blood ran cold. He turned slowly. A man in a formal suit stood in the doorway. Serious. Professional.
Familiar.
"What are you doing here?" Dean asked coldly. The man stepped forward. "I've been calling you." Dean's jaw tightened. "I told you I'm on leave. This can't wait." Parker looked between them. Confused. Dean ignored him. "What is it?" The man hesitated. Then said, "The investors are pulling out." Silence. Dean's heart stopped. "What?" "They said your absence is damaging the restaurant's reputation." Dean's hands clenched. "They're demanding you return immediately." The words hit like a knife. Return. Now. Or lose everything. Everything he had built. Everything he had sacrificed for. Everything that defined him. Parker spoke softly. "Your restaurant." Dean couldn't look at him. The man continued. "If you don't come back this week, they'll replace you." Replace him. Dean Laurent. Replaceable. His chest burned. He had spent his entire life becoming irreplaceable. And now, he had to choose. The man's voice lowered. "This is your life's work, chef." Dean knew that. He knew exactly what he would lose. Fame. Status. Power. His identity. Everything. Dean's silence stretched. Heavy. Painful. Parker whispered, "You should go." Dean looked at him. Parker smiled. It was small.
Sad.
But this is your dream. Dean's chest cracked. No, Parker was. Dean stepped toward him. Parker. Parker shook his head gently. It's okay. No, it wasn't. It wasn't okay. Because Dean saw it. The fear. The hurt. The expectation of abandonment. Parker was already preparing for it. Already protecting himself. Dean realized this was the moment that would decide everything. Who he was, and who he wanted to be. The man spoke again. Chef, we need your answer. Dean looked at him, then at Parker. Parker's eyes were hopeful, but guarded, like he was bracing for impact. Dean's heart pounded violently. He had worked his entire life for that restaurant. But Parker was the first thing that ever felt like home. Dean spoke slowly. Give me time. The man frowned. You don't have much. I know. The man nodded reluctantly. I'll wait for your decision. Then he left. The bell rang. The door closed. Silence filled the bakery. Dean and Parker stood there, facing each other. Everything had changed. Parker whispered, You don't have to stay for me. Dean stepped closer. His voice was quiet. But I want to. Parker's eyes filled with emotion. Dean reached out, held his hand. Firm, certain. Because Dean Laurent finally understood something important. Success meant nothing if he lost the only person who made him happy. Part 9. The day he thought he was left behind. Dean didn't sleep that night. He lay in his penthouse, staring at the ceiling. Parker's face burned into his mind. You should go. The words repeated over and over. Not because Parker wanted him gone, but because Parker loved him enough to let him go. Dean hated that. He hated that Parker was already preparing to be abandoned. Because Dean knew why. Everyone else had. Morning came too fast. Dean stood in his kitchen. The same kitchen that had once been his entire world. Cold, silent, meaningless. He picked up his phone. He stared at Parker's contact. His thumb hovered. He wanted to hear his voice. Wanted to tell him, wait for me. But Dean stopped himself. Because he didn't know if he deserved to ask that. Instead, he grabbed his coat and left. Sweet Haven opened at 8. Parker stood behind the counter. Waiting. He told himself he wasn't waiting. But he was. Every time the bell rang, his heart jumped. Every time it wasn't Dean, his heart fell. He hadn't heard from him. Not a call. Not a message. Nothing. Parker told himself Dean was busy. That he was making his decision. That he would come back. He had promised. I'm not going anywhere. Parker held onto those words. He had to. 3 days passed. Dean didn't come. Parker stopped checking the door. Stopped hoping. Because hope hurt too much. A week later, Parker saw it. On the television mounted in the corner of the bakery. Celebrity chef Dean Laurent returns to his award-winning restaurant after sudden absence. Parker froze. His hands trembled. The screen showed Dean, wearing his black chef's coat. Perfect. Untouchable. The reporter continued. Sources say Chef Laurent has signed a long-term recommitment contract. Parker stopped listening. His chest caved in. He had chosen. His restaurant. His life. His world. Not Parker. Parker laughed weakly. He should have known. People like Dean didn't stay. They couldn't. Parker whispered. Of course. His voice broke. Tears fell silently. But he kept smiling. Because customers were watching. And Parker had learned long ago how to break quietly. Dean stood in his restaurant kitchen. Everything was the same. The stainless steel counters. The staff. The pressure. The perfection. He should have felt relieved. He should have felt whole again. He didn't. He felt empty. Worse than before. Because now, he knew what he was missing. Chef. Dean looked up. His staff waited. Nervous. Expecting the old Dean. The cold Dean. The cruel Dean. Dean spoke calmly. Start service. They obeyed instantly. Dean moved automatically. Cooking. Plating. Creating perfection. But when he tasted the dish, it was empty. Again. Dean closed his eyes. because Parker wasn't there. Another week passed. Sweet Haven continued. Parker continued. Smiling, baking, pretending. But he stopped humming. He stopped laughing. He stopped looking at the door. Because Dean wasn't coming back. He never would. Then, one morning, the bell rang. Parker didn't look up. Welcome. Footsteps approached.
Familiar.
Parker froze. His heart betrayed him. He knew those footsteps. Slowly, he looked up. Dean stood there. Parker stopped breathing. He looked different. Not cold. Not distant. Just, Dean. Parker's voice barely worked. You're back. Dean stepped closer. I am. Parker's hands trembled. Why? The question held everything. Pain, hope, fear. Dean didn't answer immediately. Instead, he placed something on the counter. Folder. Parker stared at it. What is this? Dean whispered. Open it. Parker hesitated. Then did. His eyes scanned the paper. He froze. His hands shook violently. Dean. His voice cracked. This is. Dean nodded. The ownership papers. Parker's eyes filled with tears. Ownership. Dean's voice was quiet. For a new restaurant. Parker looked at him. Confused. Shocked. Dean stepped closer. His eyes softened. It's ours. Silence. Parker's heart stopped. Dean continued. A bakery. Parker couldn't breathe. Dean's voice trembled slightly. With your name on it. Tears fell freely now. Why? Dean's answer was simple. Honest. Life-changing. Because I chose you. Parker broke. Because Dean hadn't abandoned him. He had come back. And this time, he wasn't leaving. Part 10. The place where he finally belonged. The grand opening was in 3 days. Dean had never been nervous about an opening before. Not his first restaurant. Not his second. Not even the one that made him famous. But this was different. Because this time it wasn't about reputation. It wasn't about stars. It wasn't about proving anything. It was about Parker. And that terrified him. The new bakery stood on a quiet corner street. It wasn't large. It wasn't luxurious. But it was warm. Soft cream walls. Large windows. Wooden shelves. And above the door, a simple sign. Sweet Haven and Laurent. Parker had cried when he saw it. Dean remembered the way his fingers trembled as he touched the letters. You put your name after mine, Parker had whispered. Dean had answered simply, because you came first. The night before the opening, Parker stood alone inside. Dean watched him from the doorway. Parker moved slowly, carefully adjusting every small detail, like it mattered, like it was precious. Dean realized it was. Parker turned. He smiled when he saw him. You're staring. Dean walked inside. I like looking at what's mine. The words slipped out naturally. Parker's cheeks turned pink. But he didn't argue. Because now, they both knew it was true. Opening day came. People gathered outside. Word had spread quickly. The infamous Chef Laurent, opening a bakery, with an unknown baker. Everyone was curious. Everyone was watching. Dean stood beside Parker behind the counter. Parker's hands trembled. Dean noticed. He reached over, held his hand. Firm, steady. I'm here, Dean whispered. Parker looked at him and smiled. The doors opened. Customers flooded in. Flashes of cameras followed. Reporters whispered. Questions filled the air.
Chef Laurent, Waya Bakri.
Dean ignored them. He focused on Parker, helping him, supporting him, standing beside him, where he belonged. Hours passed. Eventually, the crowd thinned. Silence returned. Parker leaned against the counter, exhausted, happy. Dean stepped closer. You did well. Parker laughed softly. We did. Dean's chest warmed. He had never had a we before. That evening, a reporter approached. Chef Laurent, she asked. Dean turned. Do you regret leaving your award-winning restaurant for this? The question hung in the air. Everyone listened. Everyone waited. Dean looked at Parker. Parker looked nervous, afraid of the answer. Dean stepped forward. He spoke clearly.
No.
The room went silent. Dean continued. For years, I thought success meant being the best. He looked at Parker. But I was wrong. Parker's breath caught. Dean's voice softened. Success is being where you're needed. His eyes didn't leave Parker. It's being with the person who makes you better. Parker's eyes filled with tears. Dean stepped closer to him. In my entire life, Dean said quietly, I've never loved anything more than I love him. The words echoed. Gasps filled the room. Parker broke. Tears fell freely. Dean didn't care who was watching. Didn't care about cameras. Didn't care about anything else. He reached up, held Parker's face gently. You gave me something no one else ever could. Parker whispered. What? Dean's voice broke. A place to belong. And then, Dean Laurent kissed him. Not carefully, not fearfully, but completely, fully, like he never wanted to stop. The room disappeared. The world disappeared. There was only Parker. Only them. When they pulled apart, Parker was crying. But smiling. Dean rested his forehead against his. I'm not leaving, Dean whispered. Not now. Not ever. Parker laughed weakly. You already left once. Dean's chest ached. I came back. Parker nodded. You did. Dean wiped his tears. And I'll keep coming back. Always. That night, they closed the bakery together. The lights turned off. The doors locked. Dean stood behind Parker, wrapped his arms around him. Parker leaned back into him. Comfortable. Safe. Home. Dean whispered softly. You were right. Parker smiled. About what? Dean pressed a gentle kiss to his hair. My food was empty. Parker turned in his arms. Not anymore. Dean looked at him, really looked at him, and realized he wasn't empty anymore either, because Parker had filled every broken part of him. Dean whispered, You saved me. Parker shook his head. No. He placed his hand over Dean's heart. You just finally let yourself be loved. Dean closed his eyes. For the first time in his life, he wasn't afraid anymore, because he had everything. Not fame, not power, not perfection, just Parker. And that was enough. Dean Laurent, the most feared chef in the world, had finally found the only place he ever belonged. In the arms of the boy who broke his pride and rebuilt his heart. The end.
If you like the story, don't forget to like, subscribe and hit the bell icon to get notifications for more amazing stories.